It took exactly 4 words for Congresswoman Ilhan Omar to seal her fate, to cross the invisible, unforgiving line that separates political miscalculation from career-ending hubris. 4 words, spoken with the same casual, dismissive wave of the hand she might use to swat away a fly, a phrase so chillingly devoid of human empathy that it echoed not just through the marble halls of the Capitol, but through the quiet, haunted corridors of her own conscience, a place she rarely visited. A necessary casualty. That was it. 4 words. A necessary casualty. She had been referring to the sudden, brutal collapse of the democratic opposition movement in the small, strategically vital nation of Asmar, a collapse that had occurred immediately following her successful push to cut off a crucial, non-lethal aid package. The aid package, she had argued on the floor of the House, was merely propping up a corrupt, Western-backed puppet regime. Opposition, she had insisted, was fundamentally flawed, a tool of American imperialism. When the inevitable happened, when the regime fell, the opposition leaders were executed, and the country descended into a violent, anti-Western dictatorship. A reporter had pressed her, asking if she felt any responsibility for the lives lost, for the blood spilled. Her reply, delivered with a cool, almost bored stare into the camera, was those 4 words. A necessary casualty. She never saw the trap. She never imagined that the quiet, folksy senator from Louisiana, the man whose drawl she privately mocked as the sound of intellectual decay, was already assembling the weapon that would be used to dismantle her. She saw John Kennedy as a relic, a cartoon of Southern politics, all charm and no substance, a man whose primary function was to provide soundbites for cable news. She was wrong. She was profoundly, tragically wrong. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me set the scene. The House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing room was not as grand as the Senate Judiciary, but it was packed to the rafters that morning. The air conditioning struggled against the sheer density of bodies, reporters, lobbyists, foreign diplomats, and a gallery filled with activists from both sides, their faces tight with anticipation. The topic was deceptively simple: the role of congressional rhetoric and action in global democratic backsliding. It was a hearing designed to be a political knife fight, a chance for the opposition to publicly flog the Congresswoman for her controversial foreign policy stances, particularly the Asmar debacle. Omar, a member of the committee, sat at the dais, her posture a perfect blend of defiance and boredom. She wore a tailored suit in a vibrant, almost aggressive shade of blue, a sartorial choice that screamed confidence, a deliberate contrast to the muted grays and blacks of her colleagues. Her eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the room, meeting the gaze of every hostile face with a practiced, impenetrable calm. She was ready for the theater. She had her talking points prepared: systemic racism, American exceptionalism, the need for a non-interventionist foreign policy, the usual shield of progressive rhetoric she knew would instantly mobilize her base and paralyze her critics with fear of being labeled. Senator John Kennedy was not a member of the House, nor of this committee. He had been invited as a special witness, a constitutional law expert with a deep, almost encyclopedic knowledge of foreign policy oversight and the ethical boundaries of congressional action. He sat at the witness table, a solitary figure in a rumpled, light gray suit that looked like it had been slept in, his signature bifocals perched low on his nose. Before him, on the pristine mahogany table, lay not a laptop or a tablet, but a single, massive, overstuffed accordion file, its cardboard sides bulging, its contents secured by a thick fraying elastic band. It was the only thing on the table that looked heavy, real, and dangerous. The man himself looked harmless. He adjusted his tie, which was slightly askew, and took a slow, deliberate sip from a styrofoam cup of coffee. He looked like a small-town lawyer waiting for a zoning variance hearing, not a political predator preparing to end a career. The chairman, a weary, middle-aged Republican from Texas, called the hearing to order. He droned through the opening statements, the usual boilerplate about the gravity of the moment, the importance of American leadership, and the need for accountability. When it was time for the witnesses to speak, Kennedy was introduced first. He leaned into the microphone, his Louisiana drawl thick and slow, instantly dropping the room's energy level from a frantic buzz to a molasses-like crawl. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee," he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I appreciate the invitation to discuss this most serious of matters. I'm just a simple country lawyer, as y'all know, but I've spent a good many years studying the Constitution, and I've learned a thing or two about the difference between rhetoric and responsibility. He spoke for 10 minutes. His remarks focused entirely on the legal and ethical framework of congressional oversight, never once mentioning Congresswoman Omar by name, never once raising his voice. It was a masterclass in controlled understatement, a deliberate act of lowering the bar so that the coming leap would be all the more shocking. Then came the questioning. The first few rounds were predictable. Members of Omar's party offered softballs, allowing her to deliver pre-written defenses. The Republicans offered predictable, angry attacks, which she easily deflected with practiced indignation. The tension was high, but the drama was low. It was the usual Washington theater. Then the chairman turned to the special witness. "Senator Kennedy, you have the floor for questioning." Kennedy slowly pushed his chair back, the scrape of the wood against the carpet a loud, grating sound in the sudden silence. He reached for the accordion file, his movements slow and deliberate. He removed his glasses, polished them on his tie, and set them down. He looked directly at Congresswoman Omar, who was now leaning forward, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. She was ready for the attack. She expected the folksy, angry rhetoric. And that's when she made her mistake. She couldn't help herself. The arrogance was a reflex, a political tic she could no longer control. "Mr. Chairman," she interrupted, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a razor. "Before the senator from Louisiana begins his usual performance of manufactured outrage, perhaps he should educate himself on the complexities of non-state actors and the historical context of post-colonial governance. Some of us actually understand nuance, not just sound bites." The room went dead silent. A collective gasp was swallowed by the thick carpet. The chairman looked horrified. Omar had just done it again. She had insulted the wrong person publicly on live television, using the exact same condescending language that had been her downfall in the past. Kennedy stopped, his hand hovering over the elastic band of the accordion file. He slowly raised his head, his eyes, usually crinkled with a benign, grandfatherly humor, now cold and utterly flat. He didn't smile, not yet. He let the silence stretch, a vast echoing void that swallowed the Congresswoman's words whole. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Omar's smirk evaporated, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, a sudden cold knot forming in her stomach. Why isn't he reacting, she thought. Why is he just staring? Finally, Kennedy spoke, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, but amplified by the microphone to fill every corner of the room. "Well now, Congresswoman," he said, his drawl suddenly thicker, slower, like warm tar. "I do appreciate you sharing your assessment of my intellect before I've even asked a question. That's mighty efficient of you. Saves time. Very considerate." He paused, leaning back slightly. "You're right. I'm just a simple country lawyer. But I did manage to get myself a law degree from the University of Virginia, graduated with honors if we're keeping score. And then I went on to Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship, where I studied international law and the history of political thought under some of the finest minds in the world. I've spent 20 years in the Senate, serving on the Foreign Relations Committee, reading every classified document, every intelligence report, every treaty that's crossed my desk. I've been to Asmer, Congresswoman. I've walked the streets of its capital. I've met the people you dismissed as puppets. I've buried the soldiers who died trying to protect them." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers, and the benign mask finally cracked, revealing the steel beneath. "Where'd you get your degree in international relations again, Congresswoman?" "Oh, that's right. You have a bachelor's degree in political science from North Dakota State University. Fine school, I'm sure. But you know, I'm having a little trouble understanding why someone with a bachelor's degree from North Dakota State is lecturing a Rhodes Scholar and a 20-year member of the Foreign Relations Committee about education and nuance. Maybe you can explain that to me slowly. Use small words so my simple Southern mind can follow along." The laughter from the gallery was not scattered this time. It was a sudden, sharp burst of release, quickly gavelled down by the chairman. Omar's face was a mask of controlled fury, her jaw clenched so tightly she could feel the muscles ache. "He's using my own words against me. The same trick. I should have known." Her internal monologue was a frantic scramble for a counterattack, a way to pivot back to identity, to paint him as a racist bully, but his words had been too precise, too factual. "But you know what, Congresswoman," Kennedy continued, his voice softening again, the folksy charm returning, but now it was laced with venom. "You're absolutely right about one thing. I am simple. I'm simple enough to believe that when we're discussing foreign policy, we should focus on facts, evidence, documentation, and the human cost. The kind of boring stuff us folks care about." He snapped the elastic band off the accordion file. The sound was sharp, decisive, like a starting pistol. He opened the file, and the sheer volume of paper inside was breathtaking. It was not just a file, it was a portable archive. "And I've got a whole mess of facts right here," he said, patting the file. "Documentation, evidence, intelligence reports, diplomatic cables, transcripts of your speeches, and yes, Congresswoman, even the names and faces of the necessary casualties you so casually dismissed." His smile disappeared entirely. "And I reckon before we're done here today, we're going to find out just how educated you really are. We're going to find out whether your nuanced understanding of global complexity extends to understanding the basic, simple truth of cause and effect, and the moral weight of your own words." He pulled out the first document, a single sheet of paper, and held it up. "You just insulted me, Congresswoman, publicly on live television. You called me ignorant, uneducated, simplistic. You did that because you think I'm just some dumb Southern hick who doesn't know any better. You did it because people like me are easy targets for people like you. You did it because in your world, the right accent and the right degrees matter more than the truth. Well, I'm here to tell you, the truth is coming for you, and it doesn't care about your degrees or your accent." He put his glasses back on, the bifocals magnifying his eyes, giving him the look of a relentless, methodical owl. "So, let me educate you, Congresswoman. Let me show you what this simple Southern boy has learned. And when we're done, you're going to wish you'd kept your mouth shut and your condescension to yourself." The chairman tried to intervene. "Senator Kennedy, perhaps we should stick to the matter at hand." "No, sir," Kennedy said, his voice firm, never taking his eyes off Omar. "The Congresswoman set the tone. She wants to talk about education. Let's talk about education. She wants to discuss nuance. I'll show her some nuance. She wants to question my understanding of complex issues. Well, I've got some complex questions for her. Let's start simple, real simple, simple enough for a Louisiana hick like me to understand. Let's talk about asthma." He pulled a thick sheaf of papers from the file. "Congresswoman Omar, in the run-up to the vote on the Asthma Stabilization Act, which provided $50 million in non-lethal aid, food, medical supplies, satellite phones, body armor for the Democratic opposition, you were the most vocal opponent. You called the opposition a neo-colonialist front and the aid package blood money. Is that an accurate summary of your public position?" Omar, regaining her composure, leaned into her microphone. "My position, Senator, was and remains that the United States should not interfere in the sovereign affairs of a nation, especially when that interference is designed to prop up a corrupt regime. My rhetoric was strong because the policy was morally bankrupt." "Morally bankrupt," Kennedy repeated, his voice flat. He pulled out a glossy, high-resolution photograph and placed it on the table. It was a picture of a young woman, no older than 20, smiling, wearing a simple headscarf and holding a sign in a language none of the committee members understood. "This is Layla Al-Hassan," Kennedy said, his voice now carrying a profound, quiet weight. "She was a student organizer in Asthma. She was one of the neo-colonialist fronts you spoke of. She was leading a peaceful pro-democracy movement. She was one of the necessary casualties after your vote passed and the aid was cut. Do you recognize her, Congresswoman?" Omar stared at the photo. It was a tactic she hadn't anticipated. The personalization, the human face. She felt a momentary tremor of genuine discomfort, a flash of something that might have been guilt, quickly suppressed by political instinct. A prop. He's using a prop. "Senator, I don't know every individual in every foreign conflict," she said, her voice regaining its cold edge. "I deal with policy, with the macro-level implications of American imperialism. The death of one person, while tragic, does not invalidate a sound policy decision." "Ah, the macro level," Kennedy murmured, nodding slowly. That's the nuance I was told I didn't understand. So let's talk about the macro level, Congresswoman. Let's talk about the money. He pulled out a stack of documents, each one tabbed and highlighted. In the 6 months leading up to your vote against the Asthma Stabilization Act, your campaign and your affiliated PACs received a total of $750,000 in donations. Not unusual, Congresswoman, but the source is mighty interesting. $250,000 came from the Global Peace and Prosperity Institute, a think tank based in London. $300,000 came from a shell corporation called Horizon Consulting, registered in Delaware. And $200,000 came from a series of small, individual donations, all processed on the same day, all originating from IP addresses traced back to Istanbul. He paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. Omar shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. This was new. This was the documentation she hadn't seen. Now, the Global Peace and Prosperity Institute, Congresswoman, is not exactly a neutral organization. It is, in fact, almost entirely funded by the sovereign wealth fund of the neighboring nation of Karim, a nation that has a vested, strategic interest in seeing Asmar fall into the hands of the very dictatorship that executed Layla al-Hassan. Karim is a known state sponsor of terrorism, a nation that actively works to undermine American interests in the region. Did you know that, Congresswoman, when you accepted their money? Senator, I vet my donors according to FEC guidelines, Omar shot back, her voice tight. I do not control the funding sources of every organization that supports my political views. This is a transparent attempt to smear me with innuendo and guilt by association. Innuendo? Kennedy chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He pulled out a new document, a heavily redacted intelligence report. Let's talk about Horizon Consulting then, the Delaware Shell Corporation. My staff, simple as we are, managed to trace the beneficial ownership of Horizon Consulting back to a single individual, Mr. Zaid al-Karimi, the cousin of the current foreign minister of Karim, the same nation that funded the think tank, the same nation that benefited directly from your vote. Did you know that, Congresswoman, when you accepted $300,000 from the foreign minister's cousin? Omar's composure finally broke. This is a lie. This is a baseless conspiracy theory. I demand to know the source of this document. The source, Congresswoman, Kennedy said, his voice rising slightly, is a classified intelligence briefing that was made available to all members of the Foreign Affairs Committee, including you, 3 weeks before the vote. You were briefed on the Karimi influence campaign. You were warned about the money. You were told that a vote against the Asthma Stabilization Act was a vote for the Karimi dictatorship. And yet, you took the money and you cast the vote. And then, when the inevitable happened, when the democratic movement was crushed, you dismissed the dead as a necessary casualty. That's not innuendo, Congresswoman. That's a pattern. That's a motive. That's a betrayal. He slammed the intelligence report down on the table. The sound was deafening. Let's talk about your internal monologue, Congresswoman, Kennedy continued, his voice dropping back to a dangerous whisper. When you sat in that classified briefing and the intelligence officer laid out the evidence of Karimi's involvement, what did you think? Did you think, I must recuse myself? Did you think, I must return this money? Or did you think, this is a risk I'm willing to take for the greater good of my political career, or perhaps the greater good of my bank account? Omar was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked at the chairman, pleading for intervention. Mr. Chairman, the senator is speculating on my private thoughts. This is an outrageous breach of decorum. The chairman, seeing the cameras rolling and the public interest spiking, hesitated. Senator Kennedy, please stick to the documented facts. I am, Mr. Chairman, Kennedy replied, his eyes never leaving Omar. The documented fact is that the Congresswoman received a large sum of money from sources tied to a hostile foreign power, and then cast a vote that directly benefited that hostile foreign power, leading to the deaths of pro-democracy activists. The only thing left to document is the why. And the why, Congresswoman, is the difference between a political mistake and a criminal act. He pulled out a third document, a transcript of a speech Omar had given to a private, closed-door event in Minneapolis, a speech she thought would never see the light of day. Let's talk about loyalty, Congresswoman. Simple, old-fashioned loyalty. In this speech given just 2 days after the ASMR vote, you said, and I quote, "The American experiment is a failure of imagination. It is a colonial project built on stolen land and sustained by global exploitation. My loyalty is not to a flag but to a global movement of liberation. If that means sacrificing a few Western-backed pawns, then so be it. A necessary casualty." End quote. Kennedy looked up, his face a mask of cold fury. A necessary casualty. There are those 4 words again. But this time they're not just about ASMR. They're about America. They're about the country that took you in as a refugee, that gave you a platform, that gave you a seat in its highest legislative body. You call the American experiment a failure of imagination. You call the country that saved you a colonial project. You claim your loyalty is to a global movement of liberation, not to the flag you swore an oath to. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, guttural growl. "I'm a simple man, Congresswoman. I don't understand global movements of liberation. I understand the Constitution. I understand the oath. And I understand that when you take an oath to the United States of America, you put America first. Not Somalia, not Khartoum, not a global movement, America. You betrayed that oath, Congresswoman. You betrayed the people who voted for you. You betrayed the very idea of this country." Omar finally found her voice, a high-pitched, defensive shriek. "This is Islamophobia. This is a racist attack. You are questioning my patriotism because I am a Muslim woman of color who dares to challenge the military-industrial complex." Kennedy held up a hand, silencing her instantly. "Don't you dare, Congresswoman. Don't you dare hide behind your identity. I'm not questioning your patriotism because you're a Muslim woman of color. I'm questioning your patriotism because you took money from a hostile foreign power, cast a vote that benefited them, and then celebrated the deaths of pro-democracy activists as a necessary casualty. That's not about race or religion. That's about corruption and treason. That's about the simple, undeniable truth that you put a foreign agenda ahead of American interests and human lives." He pulled out a stack of letters, tied with a piece of twine. "These are from your constituents, Congresswoman, people who believed in you, people who trusted you, people who are now terrified. Let me read you one." He opened the first letter, his hands trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from controlled emotion. "Dear Senator Kennedy," he read, his voice clear and steady. "I am a Somali American, a naturalized citizen, and a small business owner in your district. I voted for Ilhan Omar because she promised to be a voice for the marginalized. But when she says things like a necessary casualty, she doesn't speak for me. My family fled a dictatorship. We know what a necessary casualty means. It means a bullet in the back of the head. It means a mass grave. It means the end of hope. She has forgotten where she came from. She has forgotten the value of the freedom she now uses to betray us. She embarrasses every refugee who came here legally, who loves this country, who works hard, and who puts America first. Please hold her accountable." Signed, Ahmed Hassan, Minneapolis. Kennedy set the letter down. Ahmed Hassan, Congresswoman, a Somali American, a refugee, a constituent. Is he an Islamophobe? Is he a racist? Or is he just a simple man who understands the simple truth that you have forgotten the meaning of gratitude and loyalty? He continued, reading excerpts from other letters. A Jewish constituent terrified by her rhetoric, a veteran appalled by her foreign policy, a single mother whose promised social programs never materialized while her husband's firm got rich. Each letter was a hammer blow, chipping away at the carefully constructed edifice of her political persona. Omar felt the blood drain from her face. She had prepared for policy arguments, for political attacks, for identity politics counterattacks. She had not prepared for the sheer, overwhelming weight of the human cost presented by a man who had done his homework not just on her finances, but on the very souls of the people she claimed to represent. Her internal monologue was now a torrent of panic. He knows. He knows everything. How did he get the transcript? Who leaked the Karami connection? I underestimated him. I thought he was just a buffoon. He's a snake. A cold, methodical Louisiana snake. Kennedy stood up, towering over the witness table. He walked toward the dais, stopping just short of the rail, his eyes locked on Omar's. "I understand that you're a sophisticated woman, Congresswoman," he said, his voice now a powerful, resonant baritone. Educated, nuanced, complex. You understand global politics. You speak multiple languages. You navigate identity politics like a pro. You've built a national brand. You've become famous. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried perfectly through the microphone. And you've sophisticated your way into multiple investigations. You've educated yourself right into ethics violations. You've nuanced your way into becoming the most divisive member of Congress. You've complicated yourself into a recall petition. You've global politicized yourself right into a career-ending scandal. He took a step back, his gaze sweeping over the entire committee, then settling on the camera. I'd rather be a simple Southern lawyer who loves his country than a sophisticated representative who betrays hers. I'd rather be simple-minded and loyal than complex and corrupt. I'd rather be folksy and honest than nuanced and fraudulent. He turned back to Omar, his final words delivered with the quiet finality of a judge passing sentence. You called me simple-minded. You're right. I am simple. I simply love America. I simply believe in the Constitution. I simply think members of Congress should put America first. I simply expect honesty from my colleagues. I simply honor the victims of tyranny. I simply believe in loyalty. And I simply refuse to sit quietly while someone who hates this country serves in this Congress. Kennedy closed his accordion file with a decisive, echoing snap. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time. I think the record speaks for itself. We've documented foreign influence, possible corruption, a clear pattern of divided loyalty, and a shocking disregard for human life, all stemming from the Congresswoman's own words and actions. This committee has more than enough evidence to recommend a full, independent investigation by the Department of Justice and the House Ethics Committee. He turned to Omar one final time. As for you, Congresswoman, I've said what needed to be said. The American people can decide for themselves, but they can't say they weren't warned. They can't say they didn't know because now everybody knows exactly who you are. Kennedy sat down, folded his hands, and waited. The silence in the hearing room was absolute. Omar sat frozen, her face a mixture of rage and humiliation. She had walked into the hearing, confident, dismissive, ready to play the victim card. She had insulted Kennedy, thinking he was an easy target, a simple Southern senator she could embarrass. Instead, she had been systematically destroyed. Every aspect of her career examined, every controversy documented, every defense demolished. 90 minutes of pure, documented, devastating accountability. The chairman finally cleared his throat. Congresswoman Omar, would you like to respond? She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing coherent came out. She shuffled papers, looking for talking points. But what could she say? The facts were there. The money was traced. The quote was on tape. The letters were real. She had nothing left but the shield of her identity, and Kennedy had just proven that shield was made of paper. The silence that followed the gavel was not the end. It was the beginning of the end. Omar's chief of staff, a young, hyper-aggressive political operative named Marcus, leaned in, his face a mask of controlled terror. We need to issue a statement now, he hissed, his voice barely audible over the din of the departing crowd. We need to pivot to the racist attack. We need to call him a white supremacist, a misogynist, a tool of the far right. We need to make this about identity, not about the money. Omar didn't respond. She was staring at the empty space where Kennedy had been sitting, the faint outline of the accordion file still visible on the polished wood. Her mind was replaying the moment he had read the letter from Ahmed Hassan. It was the only moment that had truly shaken her, the only moment where the political theater had dissolved into genuine human pain. She had always viewed her constituents as a monolith, a voting bloc to be mobilized, a source of political capital. She had never considered them as individuals with their own complex loyalties and their own painful histories. The idea that a fellow Somali American, a refugee, could see her as a betrayer, as a symbol of the corruption they had fled, was a wound she couldn't immediately cauterize with political rhetoric. Her internal monologue was a desperate attempt to rationalize the betrayal. Ahmed Hassan is an anomaly, a conservative plant. He's internalized the white supremacist narrative. He's a token. But the rationalization felt hollow, brittle. Kennedy had anticipated her every move, every defense. He hadn't just attacked her. He had attacked the very foundation of her political power, the narrative of her own moral superiority. She stood up, her legs unsteady. "Get me out of here," she muttered, her voice hoarse. "Get me to the car, no comments, just go." As she was rushed out, she caught a glimpse of a television screen in the hallway, playing a replay of the hearing. It was the moment Kennedy had held up the photograph of Layla al-Hassan, the necessary casualty. The image of the smiling student organizer, frozen in time, was a stark, devastating contrast to Omar's cold, dismissive quote. The juxtaposition was brutal, unforgiving. She felt a wave of nausea. Meanwhile, Kennedy was already back in his office, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving him with a profound sense of weariness. His chief of staff, a pragmatic woman named Ilhan, was already fielding calls from every major news network. "They want you on tonight, Senator," Ilhan said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "All of them. Fox, CNN, MSNBC. They're calling it the Kennedy Reckoning. The clip is already at 50 million views." Kennedy sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Tell them I'm not available, Ilhan. Tell them I'm going home to Louisiana. I've said what I needed to say. The evidence is public. The rest is up to the system. But Senator, this is your moment. You could launch a national tour. You could be the face of the opposition." "I'm the face of the truth, Ilhan," Kennedy said, his voice firm. "And the truth doesn't need a national tour. It just needs to be spoken clearly. I'm not interested in being a celebrity. I'm interested in being a senator. And right now I need to go home and see my wife. And I need to talk to my son." He paused, his eyes drifting to the photograph on his desk. "The one who's still here." Ilhan understood. The quiet grief, the methodical preparation, the refusal to grandstand. It was all part of the same complex character. He wasn't playing a role. He was simply being himself, a man who believed in the simple, old-fashioned virtues of duty and honor. The political fallout continued to spiral. The Karim government, facing international scrutiny, issued a furious denial, calling Kennedy's claims slanderous fabrications. But the denial was too late. The money trail was too clear. The intelligence community, emboldened by Kennedy's public presentation, began to leak more details, confirming the extent of the Karimi influence campaign. The narrative shifted from "Is Omar corrupt?" to "How deep does the corruption go?" Omar's defense team, a high-powered, expensive collection of Washington lawyers, tried every legal maneuver imaginable. They filed motions to suppress the intelligence reports, claiming they were illegally obtained. They tried to subpoena Kennedy's staff, hoping to find a procedural error. They tried to paint the entire investigation as a violation of her civil rights. But Kennedy had been too careful. Every document in the accordion file had been legally obtained, declassified, or was already in the public domain. He had built his case not on speculation, but on the unassailable foundation of documented fact. The internal pressure on Omar became unbearable. Her own party leadership, initially supportive, began to issue carefully worded statements expressing deep concern and calling for a swift and thorough investigation. They were not defending her. They were managing the political damage. They saw her not as a colleague, but as a liability, a toxic asset that threatened to contaminate the entire progressive brand. One night, alone in her apartment, Omar watched a replay of the hearing. She watched Kennedy's face as he read the letters from her constituents. She watched the moment he held up the photograph of Layla al-Hassan. And for the first time, she saw not a political opponent, but a man who had suffered a profound loss. A man who was using the machinery of government to seek a personal, deeply moral form of justice. She realized that her mistake was not just political, it was existential. She had dismissed the pain of others, and now that pain was returning to consume her. She thought back to the 4 words, "a necessary casualty." She had meant them to sound strong, principled, a statement of cold geopolitical realism. But now they sounded monstrous, a chilling admission of moral bankruptcy. She realized that the true power of Kennedy's attack was not the money trail, but the moral contrast he had drawn, the simple human value of a single life versus the complex, self-serving calculus of political ambition. The final straw came when the House Ethics Committee, in a rare display of bipartisanship, voted unanimously to recommend a formal censure, and a referral to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. The money, the vote, the quote, it was a perfect storm of corruption and hubris. Omar's resignation, when it finally came, was a quiet, anticlimactic affair. She delivered a short, emotionless statement, then disappeared from public view. The political world, having feasted on her downfall, quickly turned its attention to the next scandal, the next outrage. But the lesson of the Kennedy reckoning lingered, a cold, hard truth etched into the memory of Washington. John Kennedy returned to the Senate, his folksy demeanor intact but with a new, quiet authority. He was no longer just the senator from Louisiana. He was the man who had reminded Washington that accountability is not a suggestion, it is a requirement. He continued to serve on the Foreign Relations Committee, his voice carrying a new weight, his questions sharper, his focus more intense. He never spoke of the hearing again, treating it as a closed chapter, a duty fulfilled. He often thought about the nature of power and the seductive danger of sophistication. Omar had been sophisticated. She had mastered the language of modern politics, the art of deflection, the use of identity as a shield. But her sophistication had led her to believe that the rules did not apply to her, that her narrative was stronger than the truth. Kennedy, the simple country lawyer, had relied on the simple, enduring power of documented fact. He had proven that the most effective weapon in politics is not rhetoric, but receipts. The contrast between the two figures was a study in political morality. Omar, the refugee who had achieved the American dream, only to betray the country that gave it to her. Kennedy, the privileged son of the South, who had used his education and his position to defend the simple, non-negotiable principles of American governance. It was a story of two loyalties, one to a complex, self-serving ideology, the other to a simple, enduring constitution. The reverberations of the Kennedy reckoning continued to reshape the political landscape long after Omar's departure. The immediate consequence was a chilling effect on the use of foreign-linked dark money in political campaigns. Kennedy's detailed exposure of the Karami network led to new, bipartisan legislation, dubbed the ASMR Accountability Act, that drastically increased transparency requirements for think tanks and consulting firms with ties to foreign governments. It was a victory for process, a testament to the idea that sometimes the most effective political change is not ideological but procedural. But the deeper, more profound impact was psychological. In the halls of Congress, a new, subtle fear took root. Politicians who had grown comfortable with rhetorical warfare and the strategic use of identity as a shield suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders. They realized that the rules of engagement had changed. The old guard, the quiet, methodical members like Kennedy, were no longer content to simply debate. They were willing to prosecute. The simple country lawyer had introduced a new element into the Washington ecosystem, the threat of documented, unassailable truth. Omar, in her self-imposed exile, spent her days in a quiet, luxurious apartment in a city far from Washington. She tried to write a memoir, a final attempt to reclaim her narrative, to frame her downfall as a martyrdom, a sacrifice on the altar of progressive ideals. But the words felt hollow. Every sentence she wrote was haunted by the ghost of Layla Al-Hassan and the cold, hard facts in Kennedy's accordion file. She realized that the truth is a more powerful author than any politician. John Kennedy, meanwhile, continued his quiet work. He was often approached by younger members of Congress, eager to learn his methods. They expected a complex, secret strategy, a sophisticated political trick. He always gave them the same, simple advice. "It's not complicated, son," he would say, leaning back in his chair, his hands folded over his stomach. "It's just three things. First, read the documents. Don't skim the intelligence reports, read them. Don't trust the talking points, read the source material. Second, follow the money. The money always tells the truth. It doesn't care about your ideology or your narrative. It just cares about where it came from and where it went. And third, never forget the human cost. Every policy, every vote, every dollar, it all affects a real person. When you forget that, you stop being a representative and you start being a politician. And that's when you get sloppy." He never mentioned Omar by name, but the lesson was clear. His victory was not about ideology. It was about integrity. It was about the simple, non-negotiable contract between a representative and the people they serve. The final, poetic irony of the entire saga was the fate of the Karami money. The $750,000, which had been frozen by the Department of Justice, was eventually seized, and by an act of Congress championed by Kennedy, was redirected. It was used to establish the Layla Al-Hassan Foundation for Democratic Activism, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing non-lethal aid and support to pro-democracy movements in nations facing autocratic pressure. The money that was meant to buy a politician and silence a movement was instead used to fund the very ideals Omar had betrayed. The necessary casualty had become a symbol of hope, her death avenged not by violence, but by the simple, enduring power of justice. Kennedy, attending the foundation's launch ceremony, stood quietly in the back, watching as Ahmed Hassan, the Somali-American constituent whose letter he had read, delivered a powerful speech about the meaning of American loyalty. Hassan spoke of the simple, profound gratitude for a country that allows a simple country lawyer to hold a powerful congresswoman accountable. He spoke of the simple, non-negotiable truth that actions have consequences, and that no amount of sophistication can defeat the truth. As Kennedy left the ceremony, a young reporter finally managed to ask him the question that had been on everyone's mind since the hearing. "Senator, why the accordion file? Why not a tablet? Why the old-fashioned paper?" Kennedy smiled, a genuine warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Son," he said, his drawl slow and deliberate, "a tablet is sophisticated, it's nuanced, it's complex, but you can delete a file on a tablet. You can't delete the truth in an accordion file. When you slam a stack of paper on a table, it makes a sound, it makes a thump, it makes a statement, it's real. And in Washington, sometimes you need something real to cut through all the noise. Besides," he added, winking, "it's simple, and I'm just a simple country lawyer." He walked away, the image of the simple man with the profound intellect, the quiet warrior who had reminded Washington that the most powerful weapon in politics is not rhetoric, but receipts. He had proven that the simple, non-negotiable principles of loyalty and accountability still matter, even in the most complex, sophisticated political environment. The final chapter of the Kennedy reckoning was written not in Washington, but in the quiet, unassuming courtroom of a federal district judge. The Department of Justice, having completed its investigation, brought criminal charges against 3 key figures in the Karami influence network, including Zaid al-Karami, the cousin of the foreign minister, who was charged in absentia. The evidence, drawn almost entirely from the foundation laid by Kennedy's hearing, was overwhelming. The money laundering, the illegal foreign lobbying, the conspiracy to influence a congressional vote. It was all there, documented, undeniable. Omar herself was never criminally charged, a decision that sparked controversy, but was ultimately a pragmatic one. The Justice Department determined that while her actions were clearly unethical and politically corrupt, proving criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt, specifically, that she knew the money was directly tied to a foreign government's attempt to influence her vote, was a high bar. Her lawyers successfully argued that she was merely negligent in vetting her campaign donors, a political defense that, while saving her from prison, did nothing to salvage her reputation. She was left with the political equivalent of a life sentence, a permanent mark of corruption, and a complete loss of public trust. John Kennedy, watching the trial from afar, understood the nuance of the legal system. He knew that sometimes political justice is more important than criminal justice. His goal was never to put Omar in prison. It was to expose the truth, to reform the system, and to restore the principle of accountability. He had achieved all 3. The political system had expelled her, the lobbying laws had been reformed, and the truth about the Karami network was now a matter of public record. He often reflected on the power of a single word, a single phrase. Omar's 4 words, "a necessary casualty," had been the catalyst for her destruction. They had revealed a moral void, a chilling disregard for human life that transcended mere political disagreement. Kennedy's own words, simple and folksy, had been the antidote. His insistence on simple truth, simple loyalty, and simple facts had resonated with an American public tired of political complexity and moral relativism. The two figures in their final, separate acts represented the enduring conflict in American politics, the battle between the sophisticated lie and the simple truth. Omar, the architect of her own downfall, had proven that a career built on narrative and deflection is ultimately fragile. Kennedy, the quiet, methodical prosecutor, had proven that a career built on integrity and documentation is ultimately unassailable. The final, definitive moment came not in a courtroom or a committee room, but in the quiet, echoing silence of the Capitol rotunda. Months after Omar's resignation, Senator Kennedy was walking through the rotunda late one evening, the massive space empty save for the security guards. He stopped beneath the fresco, his eyes drawn to the statues of the nation's founders. He was thinking about the nature of his work, the constant, grinding battle against corruption and cynicism. A young intern, a bright-eyed college student from his home state, approached him tentatively. "Senator Kennedy, I just wanted to say thank you for the hearing. It changed how I see politics." Kennedy smiled warmly. "Well, I appreciate that, son, but I didn't do anything special. I just did my job." "No, sir," the intern insisted. "You showed us that the truth still matters, that you can't hide behind a narrative forever, that the simple things, loyalty, honesty, accountability, are the most powerful." Kennedy nodded, his gaze returning to the statues. "That's the lesson, son, the simple truth. Washington is full of people who think they're too smart for the simple truth. They think they can complicate their way out of a lie. They think they can nuance their way out of a betrayal. But the truth is like gravity. It's simple, it's absolute, and eventually it brings everything down." He paused, a profound weariness settling over him. "I'm just a simple country lawyer, son. I don't understand all the complex theories. I just understand the Constitution. And the Constitution is a simple document, it's a contract. And when you break that contract, you pay the price." Omar broke the contract. She paid the price. Simple as that. He looked at the intern, his eyes conveying a lifetime of political wisdom. "Don't ever forget the simple things, son. Don't ever forget the human cost. And don't ever underestimate the power of a simple, documented fact. That's the only advice I have for you." He walked away, his footsteps echoing in the vast, silent space, the simple country lawyer disappearing into the night, leaving behind a legacy of accountability that would forever haunt the halls of power. The Kennedy reckoning was over, but the simple truth it had revealed would endure. If you believe in accountability over identity politics, if you think love of America should be non-negotiable for American representatives, if you're tired of politicians who hide behind victimhood while victimizing others, share this story. Comment below with your own experience of representatives who forgot which country they serve. Because patriotism isn't complicated, loyalty isn't nuanced, and sometimes the simplest truths are the most powerful. Senator Kennedy didn't just defeat Ilhan Omar that day. He reminded America that we don't have to accept corruption, hatred, and divided loyalty from our representatives. We can demand better. We can expect more. We can hold them accountable, and we can do it with Southern charm, prosecutorial precision, and a massive accordion file full of receipts. The accordion file wasn't just full of documents. It was full of truth. And once the truth is spoken clearly enough, loudly enough, with enough evidence to back it up, no amount of sophistication can defeat it. That's not simple-minded. That's American.